Hello, and welcome back to plantcare.club, where we care about your plants. My name is Fred, and on today's show, we're going to talk about calibrachoas. Now, what do we do on the show? Number one, we like to say that we will talk about your plants, indoor, outdoor, whatever you've got, as long as they're real plants and not fake, we'll talk about them. Number two, we will do product reviews. So we will talk about soil, pots, new plants that are coming to the market. If you see a new monstera at your garden center and you say, hey, I haven't seen this variety or heard of this before, what do you think? Send us a message and we can do some research. Number three, we answer your questions. So if you have any questions while you're listening, head over to plantcare.club and we can either respond via email or we will get back to you on the show. We'll actually answer your question on the show. And there's a way that you can attach a picture too. That can help if you're saying like, hey, what's wrong with my plant? Why is this leaf looking like this? We can, if you attach a picture, it gives us a little bit more info. So my name is Fred. As I mentioned, I grew up on a commercial greenhouse farm. I've been working with the farm for about 6 years now, both as an owner-operator as well as growing the plants that we have. We grow spring annuals, which is, we're going to talk about one of them today. We do a lot of plants in garden mums. We do some poinsettias, and we do a bunch of little filler crops in between. So we have our feet wet in a bunch of different areas. We also have a nursery in Florida where we grow indoor house plants. We'll do palms and ferns and mandevilla, all of that kind of fun stuff. So what we want to do is take the knowledge and the information that we have from growing these items and explain to you how you can apply that to the plants at your own home. So we want to take all these concepts, these complicated concepts, that's hard to say, complicated concepts that we have in the greenhouse, dumb them down or simplify them, put them in an easy way to understand, and then explain them to you here so that you can say, oh, I know how I can apply that, or I can do it this way, or the grower says, here's how you can do it. So today we're going to talk about, if I can ever change this lot, calibrachoas. Calibrachoas, also called million bell, is what other people will call them. If you are listening, I will try to describe the plant. So it is usually trailing. Usually you see them in like a 10-inch pot, or they would be a trailer in a patio pot. They're often used for that. So let's describe it as a 10-inch hanging basket. They're going to mound a little bit. They're going to grow up above the surface of the soil a little bit, but most of it is going to grow off the edge of the pot. It'll be usually it's a nice dense habit. The plant forms almost like hair that's in a perm, like that kind of fluffy, you can touch it and it's going to bounce back a little bit. You push on it and like bounces back. But they're really well known for their flowers. They'll be usually the best varieties are completely covered from all the way around the whole thing in these little toonie sized flowers. As I said toonie, I realized that there probably are some Americans listening. If you don't know what a toonie is, think of a Pepsi bottle, okay? A Pepsi bottle, like the cap, the bottle cap. That's kind of what the size of a toonie is, roughly. So, okay, all the flowers are about that size, and they usually can cover the entire plant. Now, the reason that they're so popular is when you walk into a garden center or a retail chain, you're going to see them and they really catch your eye. They're just so flashy. As soon as you walk in, you can see them. Wow, they draw you in. So what we're going to do is talk about how growers will approach these plants, what they're going to do in the greenhouse, and then explain, here's how you can apply some of those concepts to your own home. Starting out with soil. So if I'm going to put these on the soil spectrum, on one end you've got sand, and on the far end you've got mud, like clay, dense, heavy mud. And in the middle, you're somewhere in the middle. I'm going to say they're a little bit towards the sand side of middle. They have a root structure that can be very strong. So they can have roots that go all the way down to the bottom of the pot, and they generally do. But the roots aren't going to be very thick. They're generally going to be a little bit thinner, more fuzzy, and more sporadic. So there's a larger root system, but they're not really thick, dense, heavy roots that go down. So that's going to be a bit better suited for some softer, more lighter, well-draining soil for the actual grower. Next up is fertilizer. So fertilizer, as I mentioned, their root system is pretty strong, which means that they're going to soak up fertilizer and nutrients you throw into the pot. Any chemicals that you add to that soil, they're going to soak that up pretty quickly. What's more important, and I don't have it here, but what's more important for a calibrachoa or a petunia or something around that family is the pH level. If your pH is too high, it's very difficult for a million bell or a petunia to soak up the fertilizer and the nutrients that's actually in the soil. So you want that pH to be around 5 to 6, somewhere in that range, in order for the plant to really soak up all the nutrients that it has. If this sounds foreign to you, if you're saying, what the heck does that mean? Check out our show on pH, and well, if you're interested in learning, check out the show on pH that we did. It'll explain the whole pH spectrum, where things fall, and why some things are in certain areas, where growers want their spectrum to be, all that kind of stuff. Okay, light levels. They can be treated as many other annuals are treated in the greenhouse, especially leading up to the spring. So they're going to arrive at the greenhouse somewhere in the new year, between January all the way through till April, somewhere in there. And they're grown under plastic because most of the places in the northern hemisphere, it's way too cold. You would get a frost if they were not under some kind of cover. So they are grown in diffused light. And then they get to the retail area, and they can either be set out in the direct sunlight or they're in some kind of, part sun, part shade, somewhere around there. They will adapt to direct sunlight. They might take a day or sorry, not a day. They might take a week or 2 weeks-ish to really get through some of that shock initially of getting direct sunlight, but they will grow through that and look a lot better. There are exceptions, of course. Some growers will have a crop at the end of the spring. So like they put the plants outside in the direct sunlight in the middle of May, and that goes until the middle of June, and then they go to the stores at the end of June. So some retailers will have direct sunlight million bell or calibrachoa at the stores at the end of June, but that's not really the main market. Main market is more they're grown in diffused light inside the greenhouse. So now we're on to the spot where we can say, okay, how are you going to apply some of these concepts to your own plants? Now, the first thing that I have on here is if they are doing really well, and you are getting sick of watering them so much, try to add some heavier soil around the outside of the pot. So let's say you bring home a 10-inch pot and you're saying, okay, great, I have this 10-inch pot and it looks amazing and I really want it to continue going, but I'm also watering this every single day. Then grab a 12-inch pot or something a little bit larger and take around the outside all the extra dirt that you're going to have to add. Try to add some heavier, maybe perlite free soil, something that's that will hold on to more nutrients and stay wet for longer. That's not going to drain as well. Now, the reason you can get away with it now is because that plant is mature. Growers in the greenhouse want well-draining soil because the plant is immature, it's very new. But now that you have a mature, well-established plant in the middle of the summer, you can add some more dense soil around the edges that's going to hold on to that nutrients, and it's probably going to reduce how often you have to water that plant. It's going to hold on to more nutrients, essentially just make your life a little bit easier. Okay. Next up, if you can fertilize once every few days, that's going to really help you out. It's going to keep some of that foliage very dark green. If you see the leaves of the foliage on, especially in the middle of the plant, and then like right in the just above the soil, right in the middle there, sometimes you can get a patch where where there are no flowers in that spot. And if that area starts to go a little bit yellow, it might be searching for some more nutrients. So keep an eye on that. But overall, if you fertilize once or twice a week, you can probably get away with that. You're going to be in a good spot. Okay, light levels, either give them full sun or part sun when they get home. You can get away with either one of them. It really just depends on what kind of a spot you want to keep them in. And I think you can't really go wrong with either of these, as long as they're not in too much shade. If they get into the shade too much, they can start to go a little bit moldy. So I would suggest you stick with either full sun or part sun. The next thing is, if I could just grab my notes here. Oh, don't be afraid to trim them. That's what I wanted to say with this. Don't be afraid to trim them. So I'm going to make myself slightly smaller. So if you are listening, I'll try to describe this. So what you see here, just above me, is a calibrachoa that is a little bit tighter. It would be considered, you could argue that it's a little bit more dense, and it might have had a trim very recently. The one that you see all the way to the far end, if you are just listening, it looks like a wild animal. It is huge. A grower would look at this and go, oh my goodness, that is a tough plant to handle. And the reason is, you have to think, that plant, you might have bought it with a sleeve or without a sleeve. If you didn't buy it with a sleeve, that plant has to be taken from off the rack and has to be put into a sleeve. So all that foliage is going to get compressed all the way up inside of the sleeve and then shipped somewhere, and then you have to take the sleeve off and hope that it still looks the same. Very, very difficult. It's probably not going to look the same. The plant that's really close to me, that plant's habit is much tighter, it's much more dense. When you put that into the sleeve, it's going to slide up the side of the sleeve, it's going to set back down as soon as it gets to the store and still look good at the store. So, I'm saying all this because if you have this at your home and you're looking at this big wild animal of a calibrachoa and you're saying, okay, I'm not liking how this looks. Or you know what can happen is if it gets this big, it can start to split. Where right down the middle, it's starting to mound all the way around. It's kind of like looking like a mushroom if you're listening. It's a big mushroom. Eventually, the weight of the plant is going to get so heavy that it will start to split right down the middle. And now all of a sudden you've got foliage all the way around the side. You've got a bunch of flowers all the way around the side. But in the very center, you can see the dirt. You can look right down and it's like barren in the middle. If you're concerned at all about this, don't be afraid to trim it. Now, growers will trim the million bells as well in the greenhouse to give it some more shape. So, usually a few weeks before they're shipped out, it depends on the grower, it depends on who you are and how you're doing it, how everyone grows. But a lot of growers will go up to the plant, and if they're growing a little bit uneven, let's say one side is growing faster than another, they'll trim that. Another thing is sometimes different colors are growing faster than other colors. Like a yellow can grow faster than a blue. So if you've got yellow and blue in the same pot, you're going to have to trim the yellow more than you trim the blue. And what that does is it just puts everything back into a little bit more of a tidy habit, and it can continue growing from there, but it's going to grow more evenly. So long way of me saying, don't be afraid to get up there and trim it. Like you would trim a bush like near your house. If you've got, hedges or bushes or anything like that, trim it in the shape that you'd like. Give it a week or two. Might look a little ugly for a week or two. Just set it off to the side where not as many people are going to see it. And then bring it out afterwards. It's going to start flowering again. It's just going to have a nicer habit than it really did before. Okay, I'm going to make myself bigger again. Boom. Okay, this is the next one. So my last note on this is how do you pick a plant when you get to the store? So if you've watched our show on geranium, if the show on geraniums are out yet, I don't know if it is, but anyway, if you are looking for geraniums or calibrachoas, you want to look for one with some growth regulator. Now, what you see here are 3 different pots that have a growth regulator called bonsai applied to them. Don't have to know anything about bonsai. It regulates the growth. It tells the plant to slow down. So directly above me, the plant is much larger. It's larger and it's not as dense. Now the plant in the middle is basically right down the center. It's a little bit tighter, but it's still not as dense as the plant as far to my right, which is, let's say if you have a 10-inch pot, the plant is about 14 inches around. So it's sitting off the side of the pot by about 2 inches on either side. And it's very dense the entire way through. I would argue that you want the plant that looks most dense. Now, why is this? It's because if you get the plant that is from the store that is already very large, it is only going to get larger. And you don't have just 1 month or a few weeks to look at this plant. Like you're not just going to get it in May and have it for a few weeks and then throw it out. You want to keep these plants all the way through from May until some people October, November, depending on where you are in the US. Maybe it's even March or April if you're in some of the southern states, all the way through until October, November, somewhere in there. Like you can keep these plants for that long. Well, if you're starting out behind the eight ball, if you're starting out with the plant already very large and you're trying to tame it from there, you're gonna have to do a lot of trimming to keep this plant under control. Versus if you get a plant that already has this tidy, very tight habit, that will give you so much more runway down the road. It gives you less of a job to do right off the bat. I'm going to go back to this plant that's right near my head here. This is another example of a plant that probably has growth regulator applied to it. And it looks like it might have actually, I know we've used those pots in the past, but I don't think that's our plant. Anyway, I'll keep on going. The actual habit of that plant is really dense. It's very tight. You can't tell as much from the leaves. When I'm looking at a plant and I'm thinking, does this have growth regulator on it or not? I'm not looking at the leaves as much. I'm looking at how tight that foliage is, and even the nodes at the end of each stem, so where it's coming out to actually produce the flower, if the leaves on that stem are very tight to each other, so if you have a leaf and then there's a little bit of a gap and then there's another leaf and a little bit of a gap and then another leaf, that means that the plant probably has some growth regulator. If there's a leaf and a really big gap and then another leaf and a really big gap, that means that the plant is growing so much between when it's putting on these leaves that it probably has no restraint. It's not been given anything. It's going to be crazy on you. So I am explaining here, when you go to a store, try to look around, try to see if you can spot something that's going to indicate the habit of this plant is going to stay tight. It's going to stay compact for you at least for a month or two, and then after that you might have to trim it. Or you know what, maybe you just roll with it. Maybe you give it a bigger pot and you just say, let's see how big you can really get. So that's all I got for today. Once again, if you have any questions, plantcare.club, head over there. We've got lots of other resources. We got blogs, we have other past podcasts and shows that you can take a look at there. We have so many other resources. If you search on the site, you can probably find the answer to your question. But if you don't, send us a question, send us a message at plantcare.club, and we can get back to you from there. This is all I've got for today. Talk to you again soon.